Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Peña Knives X Series Caballero. Very, very interesting little knife, and one I'm very happy to take a look at. But before I go any further, I gotta let you know that this guy was sent to me by Enrique Peña himself. That is the Peña, of course, of Peña Knives. He reached out to me, said, "Hey Nick, I got some cool stuff. You want to check it out?" I said, "Absolutely." But I told him, as always, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. Might be a gem, it might be junk. He did still send it along. We do, though, have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's do a little bit of size comparison real quick. What we're going to see is this is not a particularly large knife. We'll go ahead and first off put it up against the Spyderco Delica. We see here is blade length-wise, in terms of sharpened length, just a slightly bit longer on the Caballero, but in terms of overall length, almost identical. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2, and what we're going to see is, actually a little bit shorter in the blade, it looks like. No, maybe I'm lying to you. It's very, very close there. But the Caballero is smaller in terms of handle than both of those guys. So if you're looking for a large handle, this is not where you want to be. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2, which is a big knife, and this guy is decidedly not that. And then finally, here it is against, as I rearrange my desk, here it is against another Peña Knives X-Series knife. This is the Peña Knives Front Flipper Zulu, and it kind of wants to lean over a little bit here. I'll brace it against the Caballero, and what we're going to see here is that in terms of size, they're very similar, although the Caballero is a little bit smaller overall, and especially once you fold it up, here what we're going to see is Caballero is... it's a little dude, right? This is not a particularly large knife. So next thing, what the heck's a Caballero? Well, it's this thing. But more specifically, it is the Spanish word for either a gentleman or a horseman, depending on how you want to look at it. There you go. What the heck is Peña X Series? Well, Peña Knives is Enrique Peña, who is a custom knife maker down there from the Texas. But more importantly, Peña has been designing and creating knives for a good long time, and he has created a series of production knives working with Rayot Knives, who is a Chinese factory, to create a set of, well, very nice production-y sort of things that are available much cheaper and much more regularly than his custom work. And this one is going to be $287, just putting it out there at the start. And it is going to be available apparently through PeñaKnives.com. I don't know the exact drop date, but he'll probably put it in the comments, knowing Enrique. So anyways, let's talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little cowboy here. Well, Caballero, cowboy, yeah. Anyways, so on the good side, to start with, value on this guy is okay, it's good. It's someplace between fine and good. I'm not 100% sure. But look, it is a great little knife. But it could definitely be cheaper, especially being made overseas. But it also stands up pretty well to more expensive knives out there. So, you know what? I can't really get too bent out of shape about it. There's no real complaints about the value here. Everything is done very, very well. And in many ways, the fact that I'm looking at this at $287 and saying, yeah, it's okay, is evidence of just how crazy competitive the knife market is right here in 2022. So the price on this guy is fine. It's good. It's okay. It's someplace in that kind of a realm, right? And so, yeah, that's good. Next thing on the good side, this is available in a couple of different micartas. This started off as, I believe, an olive green sort of micarta. As you can see here, it's gained a little bit of a patina from Carey. But nonetheless, maybe this is the black... Either way, it has a bunch of different micartas available at the start, as well as a black ebony inlay, and so that's very, very nice. And this has, by the way, been carried relatively extensively for me. This is partly because I've really enjoyed carrying the knife, but partly also just because I've been crazy freaking busy. And this has been a very, very easy thing to toss in the pocket in the morning, so to speak, before I head off to the work to get my, well, yeah. So it's definitely, this has had a lot more use and a lot more carry than perhaps we are used to in these reviews. So there is that. Next thing, ergonomically speaking, this is very nice. It has very nice ergos. More specifically, I can put this in my hand, and given I have smaller hands than most, but if I choke up a little bit, I have a full 4-finger grip. If I go back a little bit, I have a very easy 3-finger grip on it, but it works very well, either in this back choke position or choked up a little bit onto this area here, where there's more than enough margin of safety. So if you want to be closer to the blade, you can be, but a lot of the times I found myself doing this. But either way, it's got a very nice ergonomics, and the handle, the clip on it has a little bit of crowning to it, which adds to the ergonomics. It's well positioned, etc. that's nice. Next thing on this guy, a little detail, but we can see here, actually, there are a number of nice little details on it that I want to talk about. First of them is, if we look at the clip here, which is, by the way, a very nice little milled sort of clip. It's not just a spring clip sort of thing. And that's not, of course, a necessity. Spring clips can be great, but this one works pretty well. But it's also at a slight angle, which allows this guy to hang a little bit more off to the side in your pocket here. It's not the deepest carry clip thing ever, because we see here there's about let's go ahead and measure this up here. This comes about a half inch or so up above the edge of the pocket, but that's a thing. And by the way, blade length coming in just under 3 inches, just over 7 centimeters. So, anyways, there you go. But so I like the clip very much, but it hangs the knife in such a way that it is, well, quite good in the pocket there. It has a little hidden lanyard hole in the back here. What we see here, this is a lanyard hole. There's a little post there that you can wrap your lanyard around, which is the very best thing a lanyard hole can be, which is not there until you need it. So that's nice. It does have a lock bar insert. We can see that right here. And also, this has an over-travel stop, which prevents the lock bar from pressing out too far this direction. Technically, the micarta is too, but because this micarta is being glued in rather than being screwed in, it's very nice to have that over-travel stop there, so you don't accidentally force the micarta past the point of the glue if you are pressing too hard in this direction, right? So there is that. It also has a very nice little pivot collar on here, which I do appreciate on both sides. It's not a big thing, but it is kind of nice. And if we hold it up next to a knife that doesn't have one, it does add a little bit of visual intrigue, if you will. And the micarta on this is quite good. You can see here it's wearing very naturally, just with actual use in my hand here. But it is a nice micarta. Very often the micarta that we see out of overseas-made products is, well, a little bit less than ideal, but this is very solid. I like that very much. Next thing, front flipping. This is very nice. It is a very reliable front flipper. Has very good jimping here. It has a very good protrusion with the right geometry relative to the pivot, which allows you to push the blade out that way by basically flicking it like a lighter or any other thing you'd like to flick in that particular way. And it has a very, very nice detent for it, right? The amount of force holding the blade in there is damn near perfect for front flipping. And one thing that is worth noting is that having this little bit of inlay here is certainly decorative, looks nice, but it also means that as you are gripping this guy to front flip it, your finger is not resting on the lock bar, which would increase the detent strength. Instead, at least my fingers are resting right here on this little inlay here, which means that there is always the same detent pressure. It's a very, very nice detent. It's dialed in well. This is a great little detent for this knife. So I appreciate very much. It's a good front flipper. Next thing, blade on this guy. So we can see here steel is M390, which is, if not the best, it's certainly one of the better pocket knife steels out there. And although I haven't done fancy hardness testing, etc., it seems to perform just about like I'd like M390 to perform. So that's a beautiful thing. It has a very nice grind to it. It could be a little bit thinner. We'll talk about that later. But at the same time, you know what? The grind here is good to go. Rayot has a tendency to make some relatively thick grinds. This is really not one of them. And so, yeah, I appreciate that. That's good. And, I got to say, it works great. This is a nice, and by the way, it also has a nice little swedge along the top here, which I got to appreciate. But it's a nice little tool for everyday life, right? This carried in the pocket is absolutely a great tool. And I would argue that the 3-inch blade length here it's in that class, especially when there's no thumb stud or anything. It's in that class that is enough knife for most purposes, but not so much that you're, carrying too much. It is a very, very nice size there. Next thing, this is a slightly more modern design. If we look at Peña's history, a lot of what he's done are things that feel much more traditional, right, that feel much more like old school knives. This is decidedly modern, right? If we put this up against, this feels much more like it's inspired by the modern tactical knife tradition, but the little use of micarta here, as well as some of the other little details, pivot collars, etc., still leave this feeling very much like a Peña, right? And it does call back, by the way, I believe that's the same clip, but it does call back to some of his prior designs, such that this ends up feeling very much a Peña, but also feeling a little bit more modern, right? And it is also a relatively classy design, right? It's not over the top. It's not ridiculous. The size is good, making this a very solid, Caballero's knife, right? It's what some folks would call a gentleman's knife. It's a relatively fancy knife, however the heck you want to identify, right? It's a solid little design. And so I do like this design, and I do like the fact that it is a little bit more modern than a lot of his stuff, which tends to feel constantly traditional, right? Even if it is a new kind of tradition in some ways. Then finally, on the good side, the build quality here is great. It's very, very well done. I have no complaints about inlay fitment. I have no complaints about really, I don't have a whole lot of complaints here, right? I'll talk about a couple of little details here, but everything fits together well. Everything is well done. The grind is nice and symmetrical here. I mean, it's pretty damn solid. So the build quality here is great, and to me, all that is the good build quality, a more modern design, nice blade. It's a reliable and easy front flip. It's got nice micarta, lots of nice little features, nice ergonomics. It's got a couple of different micartas, and the value here is absolutely fine. On the great side to me, honestly, you're welcome to call this bias, by the way, and one could make a very good argument. I kind of went back and forth about whether the front flipping action or the what I'm talking about here was the great, but to me, the size and the overall arrangement and carryability of it won the day. Admitting a bias here, this is about my perfect size, right? This is a knife that gives me just enough grip for 4 fingers, but it is a very, very small knife, right? If we compare this against, for instance, the Spyderco Delica, what we see here is that this guy is hiding within the frame of the Delica, so to speak. This is a tiny little knife, but it has enough grip there, which is very nice. It has enough blade here. It deploys reliably enough. This is a very, very nice little size. It's very compact, makes it very easy to pocket. It's under 3 inches for those dealing with those stupid laws. It works really, really well, and this was an absolute pleasure to carry. Because it's a front flipper, there's no flipper tab hanging out the back of it there, pecking on what's in your pocket. It's just, there's nothing really to snag on anything. It just carries very small, and then when you need it, it's big enough. And so to me, ultimately, I think the thing that was great to me is this is just a pleasure to carry. It's small, but it really works well. And so that to me is the great here. On the bad side, there are a couple little tiny sharper edges right here, like for instance the edges of the grind on the top here. I did kind of break those with a sharpening stone there when I first got it, and as well as this little area right here could be broken, but that's also very close to the edge, so no real complaints there, but there are little details, and at this kind of price, you kind of want that. Also, the screw edges, particularly, are a little bit on the sharper side. Also, the screws are a little bit, these screws particularly, are very, very shallow. So you're going to want to make sure you are using a very sharp, brand new bit when you're taking these guys apart. Otherwise, you might have yourself a bad time. Next thing, this has a free spinning pivot, meaning when you screw on one side of this guy, the other side comes loose, and actually, technically, the screw is on this side. But nonetheless, that's not ideal, right? This is a thing that Peña and Rayard have constantly struggled to do, and I'd love to see them finally address that in the future. It is tooled on both sides, so all it means is you need 2 drivers rather than just one, but it's still not necessarily ideal. Next thing, this is a nice little knife, but it could be a little bit thinner behind the edge. And even if we hold it up next to, for instance, what am I getting at here? The Zulu here, we see that the edge here is a little bit thicker than it could have been. I think they really could have, they put a little bit more of a hollow into the grind here. I think it would have been a little tiny bit nicer. I'm not, really beating up on them because it's absolutely good to go, but especially on these kinds of small knives, I really feel like nice thin edges are a beautiful, well, frankly, they're a beautiful thing in almost every context where you're not going to be abusive towards your knife, but that's a thing. Next thing, this is a front flipper only knife. There is no way to deploy this knife short of, well, two-hand pulling it out like this. But there is no way to deploy this knife other than a front flipper, right? There is no back flipper. There is no thumb stud. There is no nothing else. You are front flipping this knife open. And given it's a very good action, it's a very reliable front flipper. But for those who might have some struggles with fine motor skills, front flippers are very, very fidgety, right? You need to be grabbing in just sort of the right way here. And it definitely takes a little bit of getting used to, right? The very first day with a front flipper, you're going to feel a little awkward, but then it gets a little bit better. One other thing that's worth noting is that there are some Peña's knives that are really well, like the front flipper comes up a little bit higher, allowing you to do this kind of a pull back from the top front flip. And given if you have fingers that are long enough, you might be able to reach over the top here and, yeah, it's just not reliable for me. And so for me, this is really a sideways thumb front flipper more than anything else. So that is a thing that's kind of a limitation. Then finally on the bad side, the one dimension in which this isn't small is this dimension. On the vertical dimension, this is a little bit on the thick side. Hold it up next to the Delica. We can see it is considerably thicker. And it really does look like the bulk of that, although they could certainly thin out the stock a little bit further, which would again thin out the edge a little bit. but the bulk of that seems to be in the titanium itself, and I'll certainly give you some of that may be related to, and by the way, the chamfers around the edges of the titanium here add to those ergos a lot. And the thickness of it actually does make it feel a little bit more ergonomic, but it is a little bit on the thicker side, right? I feel like they could have lost a little bit of weight on this dimension. That's really the only dimension on which this feels in any way thick, or I'm sorry, in any way large. And so, given with the inlays in there sticking out with it, but if they could thin it out a little bit, that'd be great. But honestly, it's not a big deal. I'm just nitpicking because $275. I've got to be nitpicking here. So there, I'm sorry, 287. So anyways, there is that. This is a little bit on the thick side. It is a front flipper, and that's the only option you can do here. It could be a little bit thinner behind the edge. It's got a free spinning pivot, and it has a couple of sharper edges. On the ugly front, there is really nothing ugly here. So let's go to the final conclusion, which is, honestly, this is great. It's a really nice little knife. It's got a fine price, a choice of inlays, nice ergonomics, lots of nice little features, great micarta, reliable front flip in action, a really nice blade, great build quality, and a great size too. And really, there's not much wrong with it, right? There are a couple of unbroken edges, the pivot-free spins, they could be thinned a little bit at the edge there. There's only one deployment choice, which might not be the right choice for everybody, and it's got reasonably thick construction, but honestly, this is good. This is a knife that, as I said, I have been absolutely I've been getting wrecked at work, and it's good, right? It's the good kind, but I've been so exhausted that I barely have had time for the channel lately. That's the thing. Remember, this isn't, of course, my day job, but as a result, this isn't my main job, frankly. But as a result, though, there have been many days where I've just been, I have to go, I have to survive the day, and it's been real easy to just grab this guy off the review table and throw it in the pocket. This has sort of accidentally ended up in my pocket a number of times, and that's I think that says something, because I could have also grabbed something from my own collection, but I've been enjoying carrying this. And I really do think this is going to be a very popular model for Peña, because it checks a different box than what he's done before, right? Certainly he's made lots of small front flippers before, and many of them have had clips and everything like that. But not only is this in that class of small front flippers that are just as nice to carry as to use, in a very nice size range, but it's also decidedly more modern, right? These kinds of things feel very, very traditional. Not very, very traditional. They feel traditional relative to some of his other stuff, certainly. But this is much more modern. And it probably appeals to a class of folks who are much more interested in this kind of a modern, almost, and I say the word tactical just because it kind of means non-traditional in the knife world. I'm not suggesting anybody jumps out of a freaking airplane with this, right? That's a different thing. But I think this is going to, there are going to be people who fall in love with this who never would have fallen in love with some of his more traditional style stuff, right? This is going to feel different for people. And it's also in that class of damn near perfectly executed modern small front flippers, right? There are a lot of those kinds of out there, but this is very, very solid. And it has enough of Peña's design DNA. It's got nice materials. It's well enough done that I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy carrying it. So given that it is a great knife with a nice design, a good action, and it's in a class of knives that are really good for EDC, being enough blade for any knife task and enough handle that you don't really care about carrying it, well, maybe not so much handle that you still don't care about carry. Anyways, it works freaking great. And it's all done at a pretty damn nice price. I have no problem calling this knife a gem. This was a knife that I carried not for the necessity of review, but for pleasure. And it's a knife that I very much have been appreciating. So, given that it works very well, and it's got that touch of Peña, touch of modernity, if you are looking for a small front flipper with a little touch of tradition, a little touch of modernity, then honestly, this little Caballero could be your hero too. Okay, anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. Bye now.